something for me before I say a single word about who deserves the credit. Put on us and them, not in the background, on headphones, with your eyes closed. And this time do not follow the guitar, and do not follow the voice. Follow the thing underneath. The thing that never steps forward, that never takes a solo, that you have heard 10,000 times and never once listened to. There is a bed of sound under that song, slow and warm and impossibly sad, and it is holding everything else up. Now in your head, take the guitar away. Mute it. The song does not collapse, it keeps standing. Now take that bed of sound away instead, take the keyboard out, and the whole thing falls through the floor. There is no song left. There is a saxophone playing over nothing. That is the test, and almost no one performs it, because almost everyone has been trained to love the wrong layer. The guitar is the part that waves at you. The keyboard is the part that built the house you are standing in, and the man playing that keyboard, the man who wrote the bed of sound that holds the most beautiful track on the best-selling record this band ever made, was thrown out of Pink Floyd in 1979. His name was Richard Wright, and the story of how he was discarded is the story of how the band killed itself one full album before anyone noticed. Let me give you the fact that should end the argument before it starts. Us and Them did not begin as a Pink Floyd song. It began as a piece of solo piano that Wright composed in 1970 for a film. Michelangelo Antonioni was making a movie called Zabriskie Point, and he asked the band for music, and Wright handed him a slow, aching piano sequence. Antonioni rejected it. He said it was too sad, too beautiful, it made him think of church. So Wright put it in a drawer. 3 years later, that rejected church music came back out of the drawer and became the harmonic spine of Us and Them, which sits at the center of an album that has spent roughly 5 decades selling and never stopping. The single most emotionally enormous moment on that record was an idea that only one member of the band was capable of having. Not the bass player, not the blues guitarist, the man at the keyboard who happened to have spent his youth listening to jazz instead of rock and roll. That is where you have to start if you want to understand why Wright is not a colorist, not a texture guy, not a pleasant filler of space between the important instruments. Listen again to the chords under the verse. Listen to how they refuse to resolve. The progression keeps suspending itself, hanging in the air, leaning toward a home chord it never actually reaches, so the whole song feels like it is permanently about to fall and never falls. That is not rock harmony. That is jazz. Wright grew up inside Miles Davis and Bill Evans, inside chords that lean and float and decline to settle, and he carried that ear into a rock band that otherwise did not have it. Gilmour is a magnificent musician, but Gilmour is a blues melodist. He thinks in the bent note and the phrase that sings. He does not think in harmonic substitution. Waters barely played keyboard at all. So the floating, unresolved, heartbreaking suspension that makes Us and Them feel the way it feels could only have come from one brain in that room, and it is the brain they decided, a few years later, that they did not need. Now go back to the bed of sound, because this is the part you can prove with your own ears in 10 seconds. Under Dick Perry's saxophone there is a Wurlitzer electric piano and a Hammond organ, and Wright is playing both as a single breathing surface. Perry gets the spotlight. The sax is the thing people remember, but solo the saxophone and you will hear it floating over emptiness, lost, with nothing to push against. The reason the solo soars is that there is a continent of harmony beneath it for it to stand on, and Wright laid down that continent. This is the test that settles authorship in this band better than any interview ever could. Remove Gilmour from this track and you lose a beautiful ornament. Remove Wright from this track and you lose the track. One of them is decoration on top of the structure. The other one is the structure. We have spent 50 years applauding the decoration, and there is a third man in this song doing something so quiet that praising him sounds like an insult, until you understand that the quiet is the whole point. Listen to the drums in the verses of Us and Them. Listen to how little Nick Mason plays. He is barely there. He holds, he waits, he refuses to fill the space. And then when the chorus arrives and the whole sky opens on the words me and you, The drums finally breathe out with it. That explosion only works because Mason starved the verse first. A boozier drummer, a drummer who needed to be heard, would have filled those verses with fills and ruined the entire architecture, because the chorus can only feel enormous if the verse was kept small. Mason understood that restraint is not the absence of playing, restraint is a thing you play. So the two men this band treated as replaceable, the keyboard player who could be fired and the drummer who barely seemed to do anything, are in fact the two men holding us and them together. Wright makes the harmony breathe, and Mason holds the time still enough for you to hear it breathe. The guitar and the bass are the famous part. These two are the song, which brings us to the thing that should be a scandal and somehow never became one. In 1979, during the making of The Wall, Richard Wright was forced out of Pink Floyd. He spent the tour for that album as a hired employee, a session player being paid to perform parts in the band he had co-founded. And then came 1983 and the final cut, the only Pink Floyd album in the entire catalog with no Richard Wright on it at all. Go and listen to the final cut after you listen to Us and Them, and listen to what is missing. The final cut is a powerful record and a bitter one, and it sounds exactly like what it is, which is a man named Roger Waters making a solo album with the Pink Floyd logo on the cover. The harmony has gone flat and literal. The suspensions are gone. The floating is gone. The thing that made Us and Them feel like it was grieving for the whole human race has been surgically removed, and what is left is words, brilliant and furious words, with no church underneath them. The final cut is the sound of a band that fired its own harmony and did not realize that harmony was the soul. So here is what I want to leave you with, and I want you to sit with it the next time someone tells you the Pink Floyd story the usual way. The usual story says the band died when Waters left in the mid-1980s, that his departure was the end. That is the famous quarrel, Waters against Gilmour, and it is a real quarrel and it did real damage. But the band did not die in that fight. The band died quietly, years earlier, with no headlines, when it decided that the man who wrote the most beautiful thing it ever recorded was expendable. The fatal blow was not Waters walking out the front door. The fatal blow was Wright being pushed out the side door while everyone was looking the other way. You have spent your whole life loving the guitar on Us and Them. Go back tonight, and this time love the thing underneath it. The slow, warm bed of sound that holds the entire song off the ground. That was the man they threw away. And once you can hear him, you will never again be able to hear this band the way you did before. Where art does not console, it autopsies.